Hi, Nicole.
Hey, how are you doing?
Fantastic. If you want to share your screen at the bottom and just pull that PowerPoint up so that that first page is the one there.
I was getting to it as we speak.
Perfect. Thank you. I was trying to dual screen it, so I didn't know how long you'd been sitting there. Sorry.
No, you're fine. I had actually went to there was a Google Meet link as well.
Yes, I don't know
Um,
why it did that on our, it just did it on the calendar invite, not on what I emailed out to the participants, thankfully.
and I just had a moment of I don't think this is right, and so I just kind of I opened the Zoom meeting and then left. Let me share my screen, share my PowerPoint,
Perfect.
and then oh, good. I was like, I hope I get presenter view because, and I said, thank you so much. Thank you so much for making this because
Absolutely.
I had, this week has been interesting. Like, I thought today was Tuesday. I was all
Rock.
discombobulated. And then I text Joy really quick because I'm supposed to talk about something else with our post-secondary group for another group. And I'm like, Joy, what in the heck am I talking about today? I was like, I don't even know. I don't even know what's going on. And the more,
I'm with you.
no, and then I was like, oh my gosh, now I see everything. I just had a moment. Please forgive me. I'm not a crazy person.
Well, and
Once,
my child went camping this past weekend, and she went to the mountains in North Carolina, and she got in the lake and she paddle boarded, and she got really cold, and like we couldn't warm her up, and her temperature has been like around 96, which is, odd for a 14-year-old. And so I called the pediatrician just to see like, hey, what do I need to do? Like, send her for a COVID test.
yeah.
So I'm like, yeah, no, she doesn't have COVID. I need somebody to help me, like tell me. So she did the test. It came back negative. Now they can't see her until tomorrow.
Oh
So
gosh.
she's had to suffer and lay in the bed, freezing cold with all these blankets. And it's like, probably nothing they can do for her at this point. She's, just wrote it out, but she's been miserable.
Right. Ugh.
Luckily, she didn't get like some fungus in her ear or some craziness. Like you think about all the different things that can happen by jumping in a disgusting lake.
Yeah.
But it's like I was just looking for advice of like what we should do, and like they literally wouldn't listen to me. So yeah, this week I felt crazy because then I'm trying to manage all of her schoolwork online, make sure she gets what she's supposed to get. Crazy.
I
So
feel
that's
you.
how I
I feel
felt.
you. Logan, my 15-year-old, got got COVID, and at the time when it started, I was like, it's you have all the fever, the temperature, the all that, the fever and the temperature, those are the same thing. But you know what I mean? I was like, you have every symptom, but everything I read says, um, just hydrate, stay in bed, do your
Yeah, I mean,
thing.
there's no
Don't
medicine.
well, yeah, and so we did that for 2 weeks, and so I was like, okay, I think we're good. Your fever seems to have gone away, and then like 2 days later, it went up to 103, and he was like, "Mom, something's wrong." So I didn't take him to the
Oh,
doctor that whole time, and I didn't have him tested. And they're like, given all the signs and symptoms, and he had known exposure. We had known exposure. DHEC had contacted us. They did their tracing, and so on day 13, we were on day 14. Day 14, they're like, you guys are clear. Day 13, the kid gets a fever, but
oh,
um
wow.
and so then his temperature went way up, and he's like, Mama, something's really wrong. I couldn't get anybody to see him. They're like, no, you can't come in here, you have to go to the emergency room. And I'm like, seriously?
Yeah. Yeah. And like my husband with his job, I mean, like we're exposed all the time. And it's like trying to get a negative test for people is really impossible. Like, I mean, Rock Hill was we could get like rapid tests there and all of these other places, but it's like employers are requesting, people to bring them paperwork that they have been tested or they're negative. And that's actually really difficult for them to do a test when you don't have it, you haven't had it, but you've been exposed. Like they
Yeah.
really don't want to give you tests.
Yeah. Well, and like with Logan, he had pneumonia and he had
Oh
it
my
got
God.
into the oh crap part of it. And so it was good. And I kept telling him when I went to the ER, I said, normally I would just go to my doctor.
Yeah.
I'm not like that crazy mom that everything you go to the ER. I said, no, but that's like literally no one will see me. I have no choice. But then it was good that we went because my son plays the tuba. And so his
Oh
O2
wow.
sats and everything were okay. He wasn't, and he didn't play when he had a fever because we rent the tuba. So he's like, I'm not, you're not supposed to play if you're sick. And they kind of like not brushed us off, but we're like, okay, it wasn't real serious. But then when they got his chest x-rays back, it was like they descended upon him as if he had just like coded or something.
Oh wow.
And but because he plays the tuba and he has such good lung capacity, his O2 sats were still really high, even though he had pneumonia really bad. But yeah, they had the pulmonologist come in and they had the little tech guy come in and make sure that their O2 sats things were all right. Cause they're like, how come you can breathe? And then they kind of went through do we keep him? Do we send him? What do we do? So after 2 rounds of IV antibiotics and breathing treatments and what else? And they sent us home with the whole thing. Cause they're like, his O2 sats are okay, even though his lungs are apparently full. So no, it was quite he didn't have to stay in the hospital, but it took a while to get over the pneumonia. So
Hey, there's a plug for being in band, like.
And I told him, who knew playing the tuba would save your life, buddy? And he's like,
Seriously.
Mom, it didn't save my life. It kept me out of the
Could
hospital.
have. It could have. He doesn't know that. Oh, I made my kids do band when they started middle school. I was like, I don't care if you want to do it. It's an opportunity to learn an instrument. And in my 40s, I would love to learn to play an instrument. I don't have time.
Yeah. Yeah.
I made them all do it. And then they could choose when they got to high school if they continued, but I made them do it. Okay, so let's see how many participants are on here before I tell this. Okay, I know everyone that's on here. So I just got a text from my stepson's teacher. You guys know my stepson, does have autism. He just went to the bathroom during his Zoom class without muting his microphone. His teacher just texted me.
You know what?
Dying.
Grown adults. I have been in meetings where grown adults have gone to the bathroom without turning off their camera.
Oh my gosh.
So
okay. Yeah. Well, in our group, we would make fun of each other for eternity. If anyone in task did that, we would definitely make fun of each other for eternity.
So just so y'all know, it's showing the presenter version on the screen.
Oh, well, see, that's what I wanted for me.
Whatever.
Maybe the display settings.
Yeah, up at the top of your screen, Nicole, I can see
I have pulled it up. I hovered and I can see the mute. I can see the start video, the participants, the pause, share, annotate, remote control. That's part of it.
On PowerPoint.
Oh.
At the top.
Hey guys, just so you know, if you see me up real fast, we're actually under a tornado warning. So if I leave, that's why.
Oh my goodness. I think there's a lot of areas.
Yeah. So I have my camera off, but if I'm not participating, I'm under a table.
Oh. Did I fix it?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
All right, so it is right at 11 o'clock. Mike, is Mike on here? Yes, he is. Good. So we're going to record, right?
Yes, we're recording.
Okay, thought so. And I did get a few messages from people within our community of practice that are having the same issue as Salissa, and they're under tornado warnings.
Yeah,
Hopefully
they just
no-
told us to go out in the
You
hallway,
have
so
to
I'm
get
going to
under
turn
your
it off.
desk and all of
Yeah.
those things.
Yeah, they moved us to the hallway, so I'm going to
wow.
have to leave, but I will check the recording.
Absolutely. We are recording it and we'll
Yeah.
post it. We have a specific webpage, but I
Yeah.
emailed that to you
Yes,
yesterday.
ma'am. Yep. Thank you.
Hope you guys are safe. Oh my goodness.
Thanks. I know. Bye.
Bye. Wow.
Okay,
Wow.
let's get started.
Okay, let's get started. All right. It says the sound is going in and out. Is that my sound is going in and out?
My dog is very friendly.
Okay, somebody just said their
Yeah, we
dog
need
is very friendly.
Very friendly.
I think it's Anjanita.
And Janita, we know your dog is very friendly.
Are we able to mute?
I don't know,
Oh, there we
Mike
go.
is the host.
I'm sorry,
Yeah,
would you repeat yourself?
Jennifer, I think you're having some connectivity issues. It's kind of doing the slow down robot voice.
You able to mute everyone?
Well, I was going to say, if we go ahead and try this, is my audio a little bit better? And she was just going to introduce me and pass it over, but I'm sure happy to introduce myself if my audio is working better.
Yes, yours is better.
All right. Well, then I will go ahead and introduce myself. And I am looking at, let's see, we've got about 14 folks here. So I may do this a little bit differently than I would with a full house, because the other thing that I also have is I do have a recording where I presented on this COVID guidance for SCAZA. Now that it's more particular to school leaders and things like that, but it will give you all of the definitions that you might need for your LEAs, and it walks it through in a very LEA friendly way, school leader friendly way, with some great analogies that I can't take credit for. I definitely did not come up with myself. But we will walk through this COVID guidance, and then I will provide you with a couple of additional resources that we've created since then. My name is Nicole. I am a team lead at the Office of Special Education Services. This particular COVID-19 special education guidance for teachers, it's guidance in general, but there's specific recording from Dr. Yell that came out for teachers. And I'm going to get a little bit deeper than that did. His recording is a little bit more introductory, whereas this will be a little bit deeper, but I'll still cover all of those things, but I'll provide you with that recording as well. So you can either take it back to teams or take it back to LEAs or different teachers or whatever you need to do. Because we're kind of coming up on this part where you guys are going to have to start we've now started school, we've entered school, we've figured out kind of what school might look like. And so now is the time where we're going to start moving to, okay, now have we collected the data from general ed, and have we collected the data from special ed, and let's start thinking about what we need to do for IEP teams and making those decisions. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. That's not kind of. It is what we're going to talk about today. So up to this point, you guys need to have communicated with there should be no questions with your parents. What is being delivered right now, how their day-to-day should look right now. Now, I do know for a lot of districts, as we looked through the implementation plans, we're also coming up on a period where there was a hybrid option, and now they're going to reevaluate the spread level, the COVID levels within their own communities, and make determinations if they can increase those days. So, but all of that is stuff that should already be communicated to your stakeholders. There shouldn't be any, I don't know what's going on at this point. You know what I'm saying? Parents shouldn't be having a feeling of, I don't know what to do or what's going on. That should all be very, very clearly communicated. and you should be communicating it directly to parents, especially those ones with questions or concerns, or everyone knows their sensitive parents. Everyone knows they're difficult parents, and you need to be going out of your way right now to be extending that communication, because that is the only thing that's going to get you through without complaints, is clear, honest, open communication and consistent, continuous communication. So students with disabilities have to have the same opportunities to FAPE. They have to have the same access to the general education instruction and general education standards as their peers. They need to have opportunities to access their services and their accommodations. It doesn't matter how you are delivering instruction right now, whether it's virtual, whether it's hybrid, or even if you have a full face-to-face. Students must have access to all of those things. They must have access to their services, their accommodations, and they must have the same access or equal access as their non-disabled peers. To the greatest extent possible, students with a disability need to be provided special education and related services identified in their IEP. So they're also supposed to be receiving their specially designed instruction. So you're still doing your special education instruction, whether that be, and following their IEP, whether that be through a resource setting, whether that be through a self-contained setting, and that will look different virtually, but it still needs to be occurring. And you have to assure that they have access to the general curriculum. That's the rule. And so the flexibility, the United States Department of Education hasn't given us any flexibility in related to IDEA. They have said you have to provide FAPE, period. There's going to be no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And if there's something you're not providing, you're going to have to discuss compensatory services after the fact. In that regard, there is no flexibility. They have been very straightforward about that. But there are modifications and services that you can make, and that's where the flexibility lies. So whether you're doing that through distance instruction, whether that be virtually, whether that be through screencasting, whether that be through telephone calls, whatever that happen, however that is happening, you can provide that distance instruction, the teletherapy, and the teleintervention. So teletherapy, there's all kinds of interesting rules around Medicaid and payments, but if that student needs that therapy, whether Medicaid will fund it or not, the IEP team has said that they need it and it needs to continue. And I know that there's all kinds of LLR craziness. We have some great supports. There was a Q&A and some good reportings that our office put out specific to teletherapy, Medicaid, LLR, and exactly what's okay and what's not okay. And it's a great resource. It was over an hour Q&A with pre-watched videos. If you specifically have telehealth and teletherapy questions, those are the two things to access. And you can also, my email will be somewhere in here, and you can email me and I can get it to you if you just look at our website and simply can't find it. And extensions of time for assessments. This is an accommodation. Definitely be reviewing it when you're considering a virtual, if that student has gone fully virtual. I used to be an administrator, a special education administrator in a 100% virtual school. So I speak from a place of experience when I say the extended time. Virtual school requires a lot of reading, and it often takes more time than the teacher may anticipate if it's not a recorded video and you're sending reading in its place. So that would be one of the considerations that, as we talk about the things that have to happen, the IEP teams have to meet, consider, and talk about, that would be one of those things that are a great consideration, because like I said, when you put that much of a reading load on a kid who's already struggling to read, that's a tough one. Do I have a question coming? Nope. Okay, just checking. And then videos with accurate captioning or embedded sign language as needed. So actually, PowerPoint, it now has a closed captioning option that is really cool, that if you haven't checked out. So if you're doing a voiceover of a PowerPoint, there's a closed captioning option that's really cool. So you can still send those out. Make sure those things are accessible, particularly the sign language interpretation. If you've got kids that are getting in, and that was also covered in that Q&A, interpreters, you need to be figuring out how to interpret live video for them if they're not able to follow along with closed captioning. Accessible reading materials. I'm sure you all have heard of 508 compliance. If you have not heard of 508 compliance, it's about accessibility and how screen readers read the screen and things like that. Like tables are really tough and things like that. So that you need to be sure that the materials that you're sending out are accessible. I see that's under flexibility. That's not a flexibility. They need to be accessible. And then the speech language service is provided through video conferencing. That's absolutely allowed. It is now allowed by LLR and by Medicaid. There are rules and restrictions, and like I said, definitely that Q&A is amazing because they know the nitty-gritty, teeny tiny little details that we're not going to take to get it, that we're not going to get into right now, but they will talk about the, here's how you bill, here's how you make the change in the IEP, here's what's allowed by Medicaid, here's what's allowed by LLR, here's what IDEA says. So it's a great resource. And then it's individualized to what extent services and compensatory services may need when school resumes. And we're going to talk about, there's some terms here that are new and some that are not so new. And that recording that I will provide you, as a matter of fact, I'm going to put it in the chat because I did kind of tell all of our special ed directors, I said, I have put this out at a SCASA presentation and didn't think about the fact that didn't tell you guys this was going out to some of your principals. Your principals might have a hold of this, but it does kind of walk them through a lot of the new terminology so that they understand when they sit down and special education teachers are saying, well, this is a supplemental service and this is a compensatory service, what those things mean. And we're going to get into that stuff in just a second. And you still have to be holding IEP meetings. If you have to hold it virtual, awesome, hold it virtual. Not every single member has to be present physically. If you have a physical IEP meeting, you can have members that call in, you can have members that remotely attend, but you still need to be having those IEP meetings. If you have a parent that says, I must have a face-to-face IEP meeting, you can socially distance and mask during that time. And then if you have, say, a related service provider that says, I'm a high-risk person, I can't come in physically, they can still participate, like I said, either remotely or by phone. So you've still got to include all the right participants, but you can absolutely do it through alternative means. There's nothing that says that you can't. Yep. So this is kind of where we're getting down into the nitty gritty. So a lot of folks immediately tried to jump to ESY. And I think that's because ESY is something they're very familiar with. Every teacher who's ever written an IEP is very familiar with ESY because they have to make that decision every single year. It's not a new term. And so they said, well, maybe is it ESY that we need? Is that how we make up for any services that might have been lost during this time? And the answer is kind of not really. So ESY is based on, it's not really about catching up. It's for those kids that are at a point that it's critical in instruction that they continue, and or those kids that you have data that shows they regress. They regress during a Christmas break, they regress during summer. So it's not, ESY isn't necessarily intended for a pandemic because all kids lost. Everybody lost during this time. And that's not the purpose of ESY isn't catching up. You can still have the discussion of whether or not they qualify for ESY, but that is probably not the vehicle with which you need to deliver those additional services. The place that it's probably going to come in, and now we're going to talk about the difference between supplemental services and compensatory services. Woof, sorry, had a moment there. So supplemental school closure services, this is new to everybody in the state. Every state kind of developed their own term. It's not a national thing, but all of the national TA centers said, okay, this is about supplemental school closure services. You have to find out before you can decide where a kid's at or what services need to be made up or anything like that. You need to know what general ed lost to. So you need to know where your general ed kids were, where your general kids were when they came back, and everybody had those 5 leap days where a lot of kids should have gotten that measurement. And then so then you take that data of where everybody was and you say, okay, relative to their peers, did they lose a lot more, or are they kind of on the same pace? Everybody lost about this much and they're about in that same place. And so then we need to provide them with those LEAP services. We need to provide them with the same thing everybody else is getting, because that's what they need, because they were in that same place with their peers. The other thing, there are some things that you're not going to be able to measure against your peers. You're not going to have data about where your kids were, where regular ed was with speech or regular ed was with the behavior. So then what you have to do is then take that data, because really the school closure happened almost exactly at a progress measurement time. So you should have that progress measurement, that progress report time from right before you closed to when they came back. So for those types of things, you need to look at where they were at when the school closed. If you had progress measurement data during, that's great. We know not everybody does. And then now at the beginning of the year, you should have taken another measure and said, here's where we were, here's where we're at. What do we need to do to close that gap? It's not about what was or wasn't provided during that closure. It's about where you're at, where you were, and where you're at, and how we can make up that difference. So it's not always, oh, we've got to do extra hours after school. It might be a change in LRE. It might be okay, we can't, the push in, he lost enough of his reading, or there was a big enough gap now in his reading that we can't do push in. He needs to come out and get some very specialized reading instruction. So those are your supplemental school closure services. Where was general ed? Where are these kids? Where are your special ed kids? And then where are they now? So that is supplemental school closure services, which is very different from compensatory services. And so in that recording I included for you guys, oops, there's more here. Make sure I talked about all that. Data collected is similar to show the impact of general education, and supplemental services may not need to be provided. So if they're on the same pace with some of those peers, you may not have to provide those supplemental services, because in theory you should be providing it to everyone, because your school's data shows that everyone lost this amount and now everyone's getting this extra. Those part of that's those leap days. I know a lot of districts also chose to do a little bit of remediation right at the beginning of the year outside of the leap days for every student that was involved. And then disability receive contingency services. So those contingency services, what they're referring to is, we've been jokingly calling it the emergency deployment during COVID. So there are some kids, I will use my own son as an example. He is a student with a mild learning disability and he receives math services. So he had a math resource class plus alongside with his Algebra 1 class. And I can tell you his contingency services, his emergency deployment of services, they did an excellent job meeting his needs for what was going on with his peers during that time. So that's also the thing that you need to discuss during supplemental school closure services is, what were we actually able to provide? So in a case like my son's, he got what he needed, and there aren't any additional services to provide because he got what he needed. Now, there are other things that, even though like there were districts that sent out packets, and even if that packet was designed by a special education teacher, if that kid for an accessibility reason wasn't able to access that packet, or they never came to pick it up or anything like that, you also have to just take into consideration, what did we attempt to provide during that extended school closure? So that is also part of the consideration. Does that make sense? I'm going to take the silence as a yes. And then also, I will try to watch the chat, but if there's something that pops up in the chat, somebody holler at me if you need to. And if I talk too fast, I also do that, so let me know. But with the, here, I should go through some of the examples. So a student with an IEP includes specialized instruction in the area of reading. So before the pandemic, he was getting 60 minutes a day in the special education classroom for academic support. And during the closure, he received assignments and direct virtual instructions 2 times a week from that special education teacher. So that special education teacher was still seeing him, meeting with him, providing individualized instruction, just not 60 minutes a day. But then once you look at your data, the progress data upon returning to school, you look at what happened with all students and you look at your data for that student. So if he may have regressed a little bit, but if everybody regressed, you're not providing compensatory services, because what he got was equivalent to what the kids in general education were getting at that time, which wasn't much. So those are part of the considerations that you make, is what did everyone else get, and how did special education supplement that? Special education during the pandemic closure time was really about, let's make sure they have access. Got to have access, got to have access, got to have access. And so if that teacher was able to provide that level of services, they're probably good to go. And it's just, where is he at? Where do we need him to be? What do we need to do? There's not additional services that are necessary. Or here's an example with speech. And this, I think, leads us into, no, we have another example after this one. I was going to say, I think leads us into a discussion about compensatory services. Because this is when you start talking about speech, we did have quite a few districts that said, we're just not set up. We're not ready. We don't have, our speech teachers don't have access to the virtual things that they need to do, or our kids don't have the virtual things. Or you do have some kids with speech that they're not going to communicate over that, especially the littler they are, and or the more significant their disability. Telespeech isn't a good thing, and nobody was going to do face-to-face. So you need to look at the progress collected at the beginning and at the end. I think I kind of talked through this example a little bit when I said there are things that kids aren't going to have, you're not going to have a baseline for students. So this is one of those times where you would look at, where was he at prior to the closure? What did we do or didn't do? And where is he at now? If it's simple things like articulation or fluency, they may have not as lost as much as you think if they were at home having a lot of conversations and practicing the homework that they had been given and things like that. So supplemental services may be needed depending on where he was at and where he was supposed to be. And let's see, what is this example? Special education, they contacted the student and the parent to discuss, hey, here's what we need to do. Or what can you do? Because there was a lot of parents who said, I can't physically be there during those times when you need, and my student needs my help to access, or his brothers and sisters have the computer at that time. We have one computer, I've got 5 kids, there's nothing I can do. And so the parents just said, I can't do this right now. So you also need to, and you need to let them know, I stand ready to provide whatever you need. We'll reevaluate when we get back. And again, you'd still compare that to what all students got, to what they got, and where the gap may be. But there are going to be times when there are compensatory services due. And part of that recording that I talk about, because a lot of teachers aren't familiar with what compensatory services are. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing, because it's usually involves legal action when there's compensatory services that are awarded. And it has to do with a failure to provide FAPE. So hopefully you or your teachers are not very familiar with what the heck compensatory services are, because hopefully you've not failed to provide FAPE. And this is definitely a case-by-case decision. And the goal of compensatory services, I believe one of the analogies I used was automotive. And compensatory services are, you got a lemon and they need to replace your car, period. So compensatory services are not a minute for minute replacement of what was lost, but it is you have to discuss where they're at and where they are now and what we need to do to close that gap, but it is above and beyond and in addition to what they would normally be receiving, and so what they need to get them back on track. So was the student provided the same access to the same instruction? If the answer is yes, then you were probably discussing supplemental services and not discussing compensatory services. If that student didn't have access to the same instruction, like I said, even if that parent said, I can't do this. If that answer is no, or the format of instruction was not accessible to the student, and the student did not make progress, that becomes compensatory services. So that's those two crazy terms that are going to be new to almost all of our teachers. Hopefully they're not really familiar with compensatory services. Is it supplemental or is it compensatory? Supplemental is more along the lines of nothing went wrong. This is just really, we provided FAPE the very best we could in our emergency deployment, and it lined up with what their peers were getting. We just need to readjust what we're doing in our IEP to get that kid where they need to be. Whereas compensatory services are, there was things we were not able to do. There were things we were not able to do, and we need to make up that difference. For example, I know we have 2 districts that provided no related services at all during that closure. They provided no OT, they provided no PT, but plus they also provided no speech. They just did not have the ability, and they said, we stand ready, willing, and able to provide it once school comes back. We'll have a meeting and discuss compensatory services at that time. So no, they did not have access to those things, and that becomes compensatory. So that's kind of the takeaway, or the big takeaway of those 2 things that I would like people to think about is supplementary is about the situation stunk for absolutely everyone, and everyone was impacted, and now we need to figure out where you were and where we need to go from here. But you were not denied a FAPE, you were not denied access. This was as good as life gets during that period. Whereas compensatory is, you truly missed out on something. For example, you have read aloud in your IEP, and we sent home reading materials that you had no way to access. There was no recordings of it being read aloud. There was no one to read it aloud to you. You did not have access. That is also compensatory services, because that kid did not have access like all of the rest of the students did. I think we've got a couple of examples, and I of course give you the examples and then I come to the slide with the examples. But during the extended closure, it's really about, did they receive their services? It's not a minute for minute what it had to be in that IEP, but did they receive a service? And I've got to plug in really quick before I die. Sorry about that. There we go. So an IEP team will need to determine if the student needs compensatory speech services, or based on the progress in reading, the student may qualify for supplemental services, but not compensatory services. I kind of talked through a lot of these. I talk ahead of the slides. I apologize for that. So there's decisions that need to be made, and they need to be made in an IEP team meeting, because you're definitely going to need all kinds of information, particularly from your regular ed folks. And that's when it's going to become a little bit difficult, is where was everybody at that time? Okay, or there are other compensatory services considerations. There are just some services that they didn't need during the school closure, and transportation is the beautiful, easy, simple result. You didn't need IEP, you didn't need transportation. Even though it's in your IEP, you didn't need it, and we didn't give it. there's nothing for me to give you. There's no extra rides on the bus. There's that, it just is. And that would be a discussion, but that would be the result of the discussion, is there's no compensatory services. Or if you, or if the student had goals very specific to transitions between classrooms, they weren't transitioning between classrooms. Now, would it manifest differently? Yes, very much, very possibly. But that's supplementary services. When they get back to school, how much did they regress? Because you're not going to provide transition. And when I say transition, I don't mean the grand transition like TASC provides. I mean like I have to walk from class A to class B. I hope I was clear there. I have to walk from this class to this class, and I struggle with getting my materials together and moving to the next activity, and I struggle with starting something that I don't want to do. I have to walk from here, and then I have to go to PE, and I hate PE, and I have behaviors in between. You didn't have to make that transition. It's now a discussion of where were they at when they left? Where are they at now? What do we need to provide as support? It's not compensatory services because there was nothing to provide. You weren't walking between classes. It's those supplemental services. And all students who were affected by building closures. Absolutely everyone and anyone, and services provided to all students is the foundation of determining what happens next for students with disabilities. So if all students got packets and regressed, and special education students got packets and regressed, as long as those things were accessible, it's supplementary services. It's hard for people to understand that nuance, or it's difficult for parents to get their head around, but I want additional services. It's not additional. It may be, like I said, a change in LRE. It may be additional services, but it's not, and we're going to do 2 hours at the end of the school day every day, and we're hiring a tutor to come in. It's no, we're going to have to drop back from that push-in class, like I said, a possible change in LRE, into a resource class where I can provide some more intense stuff. And the biggest thing is clear directions. Set specific and reasonable expectations for all students. So if, like I said, if you get that regular education data back and it's MAP and every single kid in the school averaged a loss of 30 RIT points, I hope not, that would be a lot, but every student lost 30 RIT points, and your special education students lost 25 to 35, wherever in there, they're comparable to their peers. So even though it's hard because there was a loss, it's not compensatory services, it's supplementary services, and everybody is going to need that supplement, not just students with disabilities. Communicate early and often with parents. We can't say that enough. You gotta, and I hate to say to a group of teachers, you gotta allow some grace, because teachers need as much grace as everybody else. But those parents, all I can say is, as far as they're concerned, their school serves one student, and that's their student, and they're not worried about other kids. So communicate early and often with parents. And they're not gonna wanna hear all kids regressed, so did your kid. But they also need to know those points of data and explain to them in a way of, we know that John regressed, but here's what we can do. Let's make decisions about what we can do moving forward. Collect data, collect your data, collect your data, collect your data, and then schedule an IEP meeting to have those types of discussions. So for this school year, the data that you're going to want to collect before you start is what happened during the pandemic. What did the kid actually get? Could we get a hold of them? Did they turn in assignments? Did they show up for Zoom meetings or Google Classroom or any of that stuff? And how is that learning being measured for all students? And then what services were provided during the closure? What actual services? Like I said, if you had 2 Zoom meetings a week, That's awesome. And then what was the student's progress? So that's the data you're going to need before you ever step into that IEP meeting or call an IEP meeting. So those are the things that you need to collect. And what was their progress? What was the trend in progress? How does it compare to their peers? And if that progress wasn't made, what do you think they need to make it up? And then if nothing was provided, these are the considerations that need to happen in these IEP team meetings. But that first one, that's really, this is the data you need so that you can take it to the team and make a decision. Oops. There are some great COVID resources out there. This is the United States Department of Education, and this is within the United States Department of Education. There's the Office of Special Education Rehabilitative Services. That's where the special education services lie. That's the office that they live under. They both have, both these links are to, they have, it's a lot. It's a lot to go through. So for the next, I will turn this over back to Jennifer, I believe. But before I do that, I need to thank Jennifer very, very much for the support that she has given me to get ready for this. I really appreciate, because like many folks, I could have fallen down on this very easily, and she definitely supported me through this. And thank you for making this presentation, Jennifer. And then definitely check out that recording, because that recording is, it takes out all the special ed ease, because I intended it for people who are not in special ed, or if you have new teachers or even struggling teachers, that link will explain it in a very flat way, a very non-special ed way. I think I give baseball analogies, and I think I give automotive analogies. I think were the two that I picked. I didn't come up with on my own. I got to give credit, shout out to Becky Davis and to Kristen Douglas. They did a great job helping me find a way to explain it that took it out of special ed terms. But that recording is absolutely available. There are not closed captions in it, but it's very good. And then Task has been absolutely wonderful through all of this. They've got some stuff coming up. And then on our website should also be, I haven't been able to find it because I had somebody ask me for it just this morning. There is a recording from Mitch Yell for teachers that explains all of this, made specifically for teachers. If you guys don't know who Dr. Yell is, he works at USC in the Department of Special Education and is their legal guru, is a national, if not international, legal guru in special education. And he explains this all in a very amazing way. It's very good. We have a parent brochure that you can share with all of your parents. That kind of explains that supplementary compensatory, here's the questions you need to ask in an IEP. And it is very global because we couldn't make it district specific because we wanted to be sure that it applied to, it was stuff that applied to every student, not just, and in this district they do this, and in this district they do this. And then there is a formal COVID guidance document that includes all this stuff, but it's definitely more formal, wordy, lengthy, special eddies, full of junk, which is why we made those two other, not junk, it's good stuff. It's good stuff, but it's thick. And not, if you need help falling asleep at night in this storm, it will be very helpful. Very good information, but definitely thick. And then, like I said, that teacher resource from Mitch is amazing. And that parent brochure is very helpful with your parents, because then at the very least you guys can be using the same words or the same language. And it also takes away from that, like I said, as far as they're concerned, your school serves one kid. It kind of takes the pressure off the teacher, because it's like, no, the State Department said this is how we're supposed to look at it. And it gives them resources to tap into if they don't like what the way the department told them to look into it. So definitely check out those resources, and then I will hand it back to Jennifer.
And then there was one question, and I know you can't see the chat from your feature, but It says, Nicole, I have heard Becky say that supplemental services could be provided during the day, but caution for LRE consideration. Any examples of how to add this into an instructional day? This would be noted in IEP under LRE section, correct? This is different from compensatory services, which cannot be provided during the school day. Just looking for clarification.
Yes. There was a lot of ins and outs in there. Yes, the change in LRE is one of the considerations. It doesn't have to be the only consideration. That IEP team can get very creative. There's also additional accommodations that could happen because, like, say previously my student didn't need calculator. They didn't need, well, calculator is kind of not a good example because everyone gets one at this point. My student didn't need extended time before, but because he did regress in his reading, he doesn't need oral admin, but he needs more time to read it. So you can make changes to the LRE, you can make changes to the setting that they're getting those things in, but you can also make changes to their accommodations. The other way I found that a lot of districts are creatively wrapping in some of those additional things, and I know everyone hates to hear electives going out or losing out on art or losing out on those things, but providing you still get all the general ed, because really if that student can access the general ed instruction from the general ed teacher, they'll get it better, the general instruction, than they would from a special ed teacher. But when they need specialized instruction, when they really need it broken down step by step, or they really need those some serious remediation, consider doing it instead of the electives. But definitely if you are making those types of changes, those have to be documented. You can document them in an amendment in the IEP, but they have to be documented, and there has to be a prior written notice that goes along with it. So I think I answered all those questions. Yes, Becky said be leery of changing the LRE, but know that you can, know that it's an option. I will tell you the reason we initially, directors and special ed staff said that's probably the easiest way to do it. But as we were going through our COVID guidance, we had a lot of parent groups as well, represented, parents and parent groups represented, and they kind of said, oh my God, no. So that's why we did say, you can consider it, just be a little bit careful, but you have to do it's an individual determination, and you have to do what's right for each kid. Did I answer everything?
Yes, and then Melissa has a question, and she said she has a question unrelated to compensatory or supplemental, rather related to virtual. Sure. Well, Melissa, you can unmute yourself too. You don't have to put it in chat.
Yep.
Good, thank you, because it's complicated. I'm not sure if I will be able to explain this. And I know that Marge Bright, our director, has emailed someone at OSIS asking this question, but we have not received an answer. But I'm going to take advantage of having you right here, Nicole. We are facing an issue for our students whose families have elected for them to participate and receive all of their instructional services through our SDOC at home model, which is our virtual learning model. When we are amending those IEPs, we don't have the beginning bell to end of the bell time frame to work with any longer. So we have to take the time frame of the students' classes. So the first IEP that we came across, the young lady received the total number of instructional minutes possible for her was 770 minutes a week. Okay. When we figured out her special education instructional services, it came to 550 minutes a week. Okay, this is a South Carolina high school credential student. That moved her from an LRE category 2 to an LRE 3 and made her self-contained because of the percentage of time there. Okay. So that's going to make our self-contained numbers go up in our district, which we don't need. We're already over the state and national average for that in Oconee. So the question that Dr. Bright sent, I didn't see the actual question. I just called her and asked her if she could find out for me, is what do we do about this? Is this going to be a huge issue?
This is actually a much bigger discussion than just in Oconee County. I sat in on a national discussion with IDC, I almost said the International Data Center, the IDA Data Center. And that very discussion has come up because other states and other districts are concerned about that. And they talked about how you can calculate things differently. Part of it had to do with, some of it, the answer is, dang it, that sucks. That's part of it for some of the kids, but some of the other discussion revolved around what you're considering general ed and what you're considering special ed. And one of the examples I brought to them from a different district was they're in the elementary grades, they're calling them family rooms or family cohorts, where in order to stop all the movement, they're keeping kids in their cohort in their classroom all day long in their family.
We do that as well. And
so the kid that would normally, okay, now I go out for social studies, I also go out for art, I also go out for, what do we do? So we walked through that as well. And some of it has to do, you got to go back to the intent of the IEP and how that instruction is delivered. So if the intent in that IEP for them to go to the social studies is curriculum-based instruction from that content level teacher, and they are remoting in from that classroom, they're getting what was expected in that IEP. That's general education. If the intention of it was interaction with non-disabled peers and less about the instruction, then they're not getting it. That's not general education instruction. Even if they're remoting in, that is not what was intended behind the IEP. So if you look at that credential kid, look at what was intended. So if they are getting whatever the version of English 1 is, that's the employability version of English 1, and it's
Essentials of English.
Essentials of English.
Mm-hmm.
If they are getting that from a general ed teacher with modifications and participating in a general ed-esque curriculum, that's still general ed.
Right.
Even if they're not another person in the room. But if it's created, designed, and delivered by a special ed teacher, it is special ed. But the other thing they said is that can change your percentages. So if that kid is only attending, they're not doing 7.5 hours of school a day, they're doing 5.5, be sure you're changing the denominator as well as the numerator. And that helped some, but.
Well, that's what's causing this issue, is because this young lady is only in one gen ed class, whereas if she were in school 7.5 hours a day, she would be in 2 gen ed classes. So, but that's going to be the case for a lot of our students and she's only in that gen ed class on an A-B schedule, because that class is going to be an A-B scheduled class that's a year long instead of just a semester everyday class now. And we are limited in the other classes that we can offer virtually to our students who have chosen that model. There aren't a lot of elective options for them, because how are you going to do chorus virtually or band or whatever? So the discussion that I tried to have with the teacher of this young lady who was providing her academic specialized instruction was, when our district set up the at-home model, they have informed the teachers who are doing all at home that they are expected, the expectation is that they are online with that student or students for an entire 90-minute class period. So that teacher's counting 90 minutes a day for a reading class and a math class, okay? So that's putting that number up I tried to convince her that those are not direct services. Just because you're on a Google Meet, if you're not providing any specialized instruction to that student at the time, they're just working on assignments. Just because you're on the Google Meet with them, that doesn't mean you're providing a direct instructional service to them. You're just there in case they raise their hand and say, hey, Ms. Rozier, I have a question. Because
I think that would depend in the end. There's a couple nuances in there that are related to credit versus no credit. And if it was like if you were offering an elective credit for that, I think you would have to count every minute. But if you're not offering an elective credit, you're right. It isn't a direct service. But if you are offering a high school credit, an elective credit for that's a direct service.
No, it's a South Carolina high school credential credit.
Okay.
Because it's the Essentials of English and Essentials of Math classes that I'm referring to.
Well, you can offer elective credit for that, right?
Froze, Cole.
I said you can offer elective credit for that, but if you've chosen not to, that's fine.
Right.
But those can count as electives. Yeah, but if it's also credit towards the credential and there are expectations, well, no, it depends on the expectations. If she's meeting them by the work that she is doing and not meeting them by the attendance, then it's not a direct service.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
it's sticky. It stinks. And we've actually even talked about the feds have talked about not changing LRE. They're not waiving any requirements, but talking about grace for the year with LRE, because like I said, it came up in a national discussion and there were no quick, easy answers other than, wow, you're right, that sucks.
So we don't have an answer at our state level either?
Oh, no, there's not one federally. You definitely don't have one at the state level. Like I said, the consideration is, do we have to figure out if it's going to cause a problem with significant disproportionality, because then you're throwing in people have got to spend 15% of their money to try to fix this. And there are solutions coming, but until we know what the data actually says, we can't make an informed decision about what we should do. Does that make sense?
Yes and no. I mean, we've got to have these IEPs amended, and we've been waiting on an answer so that we can get these IEPs amended. And
no, amend them anyway. But if that's a change in LRE, it's a change in LRE, and that's what it is. It is what it is.
But do you agree with me though, as far as what's considered a direct service? Mm-hmm. As far as what I was explaining to that teacher, because that's what I have the transition program teachers that are here in my building. That's the way I have them doing it, because typically we provide 750 minutes a week of transition services, because we have a 2.5 hour block of time that we have the students where we do a variety of things, but a lot of it's off campus, which we can't do with them right now. Right. So that 750 minutes has been reduced down depending on the needs of the students, anywhere from, I've seen some as little as 95 minutes a week and some as much as, closer to 2 hours a week. But that's because I have the teachers only counting the specific time that they are providing direct instruction to that student, not the time that the student's working on their assignments and doing those sorts of things.
Right.
Even if Google Meet is still open and on.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Am I viewing that correctly?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Awesome.
Like I said, it depends on the intent of that time, but if the intent is not to be providing instruction during that time, just simply to be available, no, that's you are interpreting it absolutely correct. Okay,
because if we fix them related to that, then these kids will not be self-contained, and that will solve our problem.
Okay. Yeah, excellent.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I'm sorry to everyone else that took up so much time.
Like I said, it's a national issue. I'm sure you're not the only one with the question.
Oh, yeah,
right.
I agree. Okay, the only thing I wanted to say to wrap up was obviously thank you so very much for your time and the information today and being with us. We do have our next 2 Community of Practice webinars already scheduled for October 15th and November the 19th. When I did the doodle poll, we were kind of 50-50 with the time of 11 in the morning or 3 in the afternoon. So we stuck with 11. I know that the 19th is also during our Transition Alliance conference, but we will work that in because it is important. And then I sent everyone a link yesterday whenever I sent you the reminder email about our webpage. Mike has made us a place where we can keep our resources. So this presentation will be here. Any document that Nicole shared with us, we will also put it on our webpage, the recorded webinar. And then if you lose an email or can't remember when something is scheduled, then we will make sure that all of our Zoom links and upcoming webinars specific to our Community of Practice will stay on the webpage. And we hope that you use this information and help the people in your districts. And if you have questions, please reach out to us. That's what we're here for. We want to help you. We hope you guys all stay safe, and the tornadoes are, going to get through. I mean, I'm looking out my window right now. My pool may overflow. There's so much rain happening, but thank you guys. Educators are amazing. All the work that you do, we appreciate you and love you. And if there's anything we can do to support you, that's what we're here for. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Jennifer. We really, really, really appreciate TASC and all that you guys do for us. You are indispensable.
Ditto as far as OSIS is concerned. We love you, TASC. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Nicole.